Hey, Whiskey Ringers, it is the end of spring and almost into summer, and I have some big updates for you. First off, in case you haven't heard, we are going to be doing our first ever Whiskey Ring podcast barrel pick. It is going to be not one, but two barrels of Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof Rye straight from Lynchburg. And if that wasn't incentive enough, one of your fellow patrons, a patron at the $25 level, is going to be joining me for the pick. This is going to be the first pick of many. If you want your chance to be part of a pick team, this is the perfect time to up that Patreon pledge to $25. There are only 4 spots available at that tier. Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. This is, before I start and introduce my guest, we were just chatting beforehand, and it turns out that if you include published podcasts, recorded ones to come out, as well as bonus ones that have already come out, this is actually going to be the 100th podcast that is recorded and the 100th episode put out. Now, it'll be, I believe, episode 95 in the charts, but just wanted to take a special note that it will be episode 100 overall. And it's been an absolute pleasure and privilege getting to this point over the last 2+ years. And I'm thrilled to have on somebody that I've had on before, but in a completely different capacity, to join me for this special episode to talk about a completely new whiskey that also touches on one of my favorite topics and the ones that I'm most passionate about. So all that saccharine-ness out of the way, I'm happy to welcome back Ari Sussman. You may well remember him from our episode on Mammoth Distilling. Mentions of him through other episodes having to do with Rose and Rye, with different projects around the country, around the world. He's quite a well-traveled gentleman in terms of the whiskey and spirits world. But today, I have him on to talk about a new venture, which is Outsiders Spirits. And it's his new venture in conjunction with Eric Church and Raj Alva. So with all that, welcome back, Ari.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on the very impressive milestone. 100 long-form podcasts in 2 years is no small feat, and so huge round of applause to you.
Thank you. It's really been a blast, and I can't wait for the next 100. So I've already got the next 8 or 9 scheduled. So if you think I'm going anywhere, think again. So jumping right in. We were chatting a little bit, like I said, before we started recording, and normally I like doing a lot of research and listening to other episodes and interviews and all this, but as far as this one goes, this one's very new. You were announced, I believe, on May 3rd. You guys went live with this.
That sounds about right. Which is about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, as of recording. So we're recording on May 22nd, just for reference. So yeah, this is something brand new. He's talked about it with a couple of outlets, with notably Mark Gillespie over at WhiskeyCast. And other than that, though, been a little tough to do some research because you guys are brand new. So which is fantastic, and I love it too. So with that, let's just jump into going into the story of how Outsiders Spirits as an organization, as a thing, came to be.
Yeah. So it did not start with me. It started with friendship between our 2 founders, Eric Church, who is a musician and performance artist, and Raj Alva, who's a serial entrepreneur. They both share a passion for golf, and they met on a golf course. They're serious competitive golf players. They're the real deal, and they're passionate about golf, and they travel the world playing golf with very good golfers. And they were partnered up. I should know at what golf club. I'm decidedly not a golfer. It's like they say in the Big Lebowski, obviously you're not a golfer. But Eric and Raj were paired up in one of these pairing tournaments. And, from the looks of it, they sort of come from different worlds. Raj was born in India. He talks about uh, being born with you know in I wouldn't say poverty, but certainly not in opulence in any sense of the word. Eric comes from North Carolina, and they each found their way in life. Raj's family ended up moving to Saginaw, Michigan, of all places, which is just actually up the road from where I am. Raj went to University of Michigan for undergrad and then Harvard Business School. Eric grew up in North Carolina and had a dream of one day being a country superstar, a musical superstar, which he achieved at a relatively young age. He became a musical legend. Like I said, they met on this golf course, and they discovered that they both had a number of shared passions beyond golf, including family. They're both very tight, close with their family, and whiskey. Eric had previously a song about Jack Daniels and has released products with Jack Daniels before. And Raj has an incredible palate and whiskey collection, appreciates rare whiskeys, rare scotches, can speak eloquently and passionately and knowledgeably about all kinds of whiskeys. And on the golf course, they just came up with this, as we say, fakakta idea of starting their own whiskey company that would approach whiskey making in a different way than most contemporary brands do. So they set out to make great whiskeys, since they both consider themselves a bit of outsiders as far as the whiskey world goes. They're not sort of in the epicenter of Kentucky or whatnot. They sort of have an outsider's view of whiskey making, and decided that they would lean into that outsider's view, and they would try to do things differently, and they would try to innovate and see how far they could push the boundaries and nurture creativity, and experimentation, and essentially without regard to geopolitical designations like states, which again, that's an outsider's perspective in a place like the US, that they would be agnostic about location and where products came from, as long as they were great. And this concept of bringing things together and blending them, they sort of roughly had this idea. One day I got a phone call saying there's I got a phone call from a mutual friend that knows them and knows me as well, and said there are two really extraordinary individuals who have an idea for a spirits company, and maybe you just want to talk with them and see how it goes. And I had the opportunity of chatting with each of them individually, and sometimes you have conversations and one thing just leads to the next thing, and you can tell there's a vibe, and there's a melding of ideas. And for me, that happened both in my conversations with Raj, as well as my conversations with Eric. They were just beautiful and free flowing, and every time someone had an idea, it would lead to entire new threads to talk about. And so that's a great feeling when you find that feeling in a conversation with someone in this industry, and there's such a nurturing of ideas and creativity, and you know that everyone in the room can execute. That's rare, and you can't not follow up on those opportunities, because you'll lay awake in bed wondering what happened, what could have been.
I hear you. I've been give a shout out to my home bar, Travel Bar. It's one of those things that every time I go down there, whether it's just for an event or just to drink, just chat with I don't know, just to visit. I always meet somebody. I've had the pleasure, I don't know if she's listening or not, I've had the pleasure of meeting Amanda Schuster, who's a fantastic writer and just came out with a new book on cocktails. Kurt Maitland's a number of other New York City people and people from around the world, frankly, as well. And there is something to be said about tending to say yes to things, and I can sense it's hard to say. It's not that it's hard to say no. It's that it's so exciting to say yes to meeting these new opportunities and people, things like that. which I can hear in the way you're describing how the story came about. Um, now this may be a question that ultimately has to go back to Eric in particular, but it applies to the whole team as well. And that is, you mentioned he's done these whiskey specific projects with Jack Daniels, and I remember reviewing that product too. And you can search the review on the website. But the as the next question is kind of two part. The first one is, how did the team envision this venture separating Eric from what he's done with Jack Daniels? Not to erase it, but to, say that, okay, this is more than just a celebrity brand, where this is going to be his brand that he wants to stand behind, and it's his own thing.
Yeah, well, first of all, that I'm not going to put words in Eric's mouth. He is
Sure.
far more articulate, even than I am. Absolutely. He had wonderful, successful product with Jack Daniels, which is a incredible, venerable brand out of the state in which he lives, Tennessee. And I can't speak to his intentions, but what I can say is Eric is a relentlessly creative human being, and I think he's always looking for a new challenge. And I'm a big fan of those products that he put out. I'm a big fan of a song of his called Jack Daniels, which he performs in concert, and we'll get to his perform. I mean, I've seen him in concert now, and he's an incredible performer. Like men crying, women cry, like people rocking out. He's that's a whole nother skill set that he has. But I think that he has this philosophy. He told me this basically on our first phone call. I had a similar question. Why do this? Is this something that you're serious about? And he had this answer that was basically saying, it's okay to break things. It's okay to, if something's working, that doesn't mean that you don't kind of take it apart and do it in a different way. He's not resting on his laurels. He's not resting on his celebrity. He's a creative person. He has a sort of a relentless creativity. And I think that maybe the experience with Jack Daniels gave him a sense of what is possible in this industry from a creative point of view. And this is just something that he wanted to explore. So we get to be the beneficiaries of that level of creativity and determination.
And then, that goes directly to the second part of the question, which is really about celebrity brands. And I'll try to be, as objective and as fair as I can on this, just because I feel like it's something the general whiskey market doesn't care that much about in a certain way. Like, they don't mind that Bob Dylan is behind Heaven's Door. They don't mind that, George Clooney's behind Casamigos. Maybe it's a draw, maybe it's not. But they're a small but vocal group who really hate it when a celebrity just kind of slaps their name on a label and puts out a product.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Clearly that's not happening here. And I don't, from what I've heard, that's not what happened to Jack Daniels either. So that's not, there's no accusations there, but the point really being, there are clear pitfalls and potholes with having a celebrity involved with a brand. With those potential pitfalls in place, I'm trying to phrase this question right, and I feel like I'm grasping at it, but what is Eric's role? Like, how in depth is he going to be with the product, with the marketing? Because I know this isn't a one-time thing. You're planning on multiple releases of different products. So how deeply will Eric be involved? Let's put it that way. And with all of this, how do you foresee kind of avoiding some of those celebrity whiskey, your celebrity spirits pitfalls?
Great question. So there are clearly a lot of celebrity whiskeys out there, and my personal experience, this is not the first phone call I've gotten from someone who has a notable name that wanted to produce a whiskey. Usually give them someone else's number, because what they're looking to do is put their name on something that's not compelling or interesting in any kind of way. And, good luck to them. Not that there's anything wrong with that. This is a unique situation. He said off the bat that he didn't want his name on the label, and his name is not on the label. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is that all of a sudden, that is a very different approach to a quote celebrity product. Don't put my name on the label. I don't want to have my signature on it. Certainly the other brands that you mentioned have leaned into that, because celebrities have a certain amount of credibility in our society, because people feel like they know them, or they know something of what, if their music is of quality, or their acting or movies are of quality, then surely their spirits must be of quality as well. Again, Eric's not afraid to just, this is not the first time nor the last that he chooses the opposite of what is conventional wisdom. It's very common, if you have a celebrity brand, to write your name in big letters on the front of the bottle. This doesn't happen here, right? This name is not on the bottle. The pitfalls that, that's one way of avoiding it. Also, conventional wisdom in the spirits industry is come out with a product that is equivalent to other products, put a celebrity's name on it, and it's more likely to sell, and you can flip the company real quickly. Because there's a lot of case studies of this happening. Like, a lot of people have done this. Put it in a weird bottle, or just put their name or their picture sometimes on it. This was not his intention, which is, frankly, what I found so interesting and compelling, and made me say this could be a really interesting journey to go along with. So we're not leaning too heavily into that from a product point of view. What I can say is that while his name is not on the bottle, the concept for the liquid, which is a unique concept that we should talk about, does very much come from him, and from at least my take on his music and what I heard, and thinking about what I took out of his music and his artistry. I feel like we were able to at least attempt somewhat successfully to put into a liquid concept into the bottle. So yeah, we did not lean into the celebrity in any kind of significant way in the ways that other folks do. It really is about the team. What's his level of involvement? He's on the phone calls. He's intimately involved with everything from the design of the bottle to evaluating various prototypes of the blend, to the verbiage on the labels and everything in between. He's not ceding responsibility of this brand and this company to other people. Very much, both he and Raj are very much involved, really, with any decision that's being made.
So let's jump from that right into the creative process. So you mentioned you've seen him in concert now. You in the press releases, much was made of you immersing yourself in his music to get a sense of his ethos, his what he's interested in, how he comes about, how he expresses himself. So from a, let's call it an artistic sense or blender's sense, walk us through that, like, real paint a picture of what it's like. You teased a little bit earlier with being at a concert, seeing grown men crying and all this, but paint the picture of how that translates into a blend.
He's an incredible performer, and if you have the opportunity of seeing him at a concert, I absolutely recommend it. He's like an artist in his prime. But I was very curious about his music. I knew some of his music. I wasn't intimately familiar with all of his albums. The song that I was most familiar with is a song called Springsteen, about Bruce Springsteen. And Bruce Springsteen is important to me for many reasons. He's one of the soundtracks of my entire life, but he's also the very first conversation that I had with my wife when we first met was about Bruce Springsteen and our favorite Bruce Springsteen songs. And it just so happened that the very first conversation I had with my wife was about a song on Springsteen's first album called For You, which is a deep cut. It's not on any of the greatest hits, but for me, it was like my favorite song by the guy. And when I met my wife, she knew all of the words to the song. And one of our first dates was to a Springsteen concert, and so Springsteen always meant a lot to me personally. So I knew the song Springsteen, and there's some great poetry in that song. And so I was familiar with a couple of his songs. I knew that he was a poet and a good singer, and that he and I maybe shared some references, because the way he sings about Springsteen was very much how I feel about that person, that singer who's incredibly important in my life. I'm a music geek. I love music. Music is the sound, I have music playing all the time. Since I was a kid, I've been playing music constantly. I have a huge record collection. I'm a horrible musician, but I love music. And when I finally had the opportunity of putting on a nice set of headphones, and I lit a cigar and I had some whiskey, and I listened to Eric's albums all the way through, all of them. I had more than one cigar. And what surprised me, or what really stuck with me, was that this is certainly country, and it's in the form of country music. That's clear. But there are so many references from the start of his career to his most recent releases throughout, where he's referencing literature, he's referencing blues, deep blues. I was listening to a song and he references, the song One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer, which when I was growing up, I remember George Thorogood and the Destroyers. I had a tape that had, I think it was a single. They used to have single tapes, and one song on either side, and it wouldn't come in a plastic case, it would come in a paper sleeve. That's how singles came in cassettes when I was a kid. And on one side, it had Bad to the Bone, which had a great video of him in a pool hall, and he hits the cigarette ash, and then the ball goes in. It's incredible. It sticks with me to this point. And on the other side was One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer, which I later came to understand. The version that I love is by John Lee Hooker, who's a Detroit. We claim him in Detroit. Other people claim him too, but he came to Detroit and played music. So he talks about One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer. He talks about all kinds of references from Springsteen to George Thorogood and John Lee Hooker. There is Appalachian and Scottish style folk music and melodies throughout his catalog. Just a ton of different types of music. And then I also hear arena rock, and you can hear sort of hip hop influenced drums on a bunch of tracks. And it struck me that, yeah, this is country music, but this is someone who knows how to pull the different musical traditions and put them together in his own way. It really reminded me, I don't know if you saw this Ken Burns documentary about country music.
I haven't yet.
Oh, it's so good. So Ken Burns from Ann Arbor is an incredible documentary filmmaker. He has this documentary about the history of country music, and throughout the documentary, one of the people who kind of serves as one of the experts is an amazing musician named Marty Stewart, who plays with a group called the Fabulous Superlatives, which beautiful name. Later, I find out when I go and visit Eric Church's office that Marty Stewart's with the same company. In his office, Marty Stewart's office is right there. But in this documentary by Ken Burns, Marty Stewart talks about something called the rub. And the rub is when blues music and music from the Appalachians and from Irish Scot folk music. It all kind of comes together, and there's friction, and country music kind of comes out of that rub of different traditions coming together. And as I was listening to Eric's music, I was thinking, this is a modern version of that. Like what they were talking about, the birth of country music 100 years ago, these like forms of art coming together and creating something new. I'm hearing a contemporary version of that in Eric's music in a way that I don't hear in most music. A lot of folks are like true to form. I love it when musicians can pull together these different threads, like the Pogues, that can bring together punk and traditional Irish music, for instance. Like that works. And I heard Eric pulling together a ton of different traditions into his music. And it reminded me of back in my bartending days. The thinking was he's able to put all these different traditions together. What would a whiskey be that could pull together different whiskey making traditions and put them together in a unique way? Just like Eric's pulling together these musical traditions, go around the world, find great whiskeys, but find out how they can fit together in a new kind of form of whiskey. That was the original idea. And then took this kind of weird step further and thought, well, Eric's music's in the form of country music, but form of American whiskey. That one of the kind of ways that we define American whiskey is this concept of a mash bill. There's all these different mash bills, but there's actually only a handful of mash bills that folks, in the commodity mash bill, the most common mash bill has 21% rye.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually two different forms of the 21% mash bill. This is the 75-21 4, 75% corn. But there's another one that is popular in Tennessee, which is 70% corn, 21% rye, 9% malted barley. And I thought, to give this concept of like pulling together different whiskeys from different places, different categories of whiskey, the form of American whiskey, it would be interesting to do the blend in proportions of a recognizable mash bill. Kind of a novel idea. I'm sure people have done this before, but I'm unaware of it. And so we started prototyping with it, thinking, we had a lot of ideas, but we started prototyping with that one. And it turned out it was actually really cool. We really liked it. We actually tried the 75-21 4. We tried the 70 21 9. We actually tried some 80-10-10s. We tried a 60-36 4. We tried a lot of mash bills with various stocks of whiskey that we had access to. And this is the one that we really liked because it was very much unlike anything else, to my palate, anything else that was out there. But it made sense sort of on an intellectual level, but it also just made sense as a whiskey on your palate. And all of those things coming together, it just seemed like, okay, well, that's an interesting concept that we're unaware if anyone's ever tried it before. It did remind me of being a bartender back in the day. And, I come from, I worked a still for a long time. Every day I ran a still and turned the steam valve and did mashing and fermentation and everything. But really, my palate was developed when I was a bartender. I can't think of a job out there where you get a better sense of palate development than as a bartender. There's no other job out there where you can try hundreds of wines or hundreds of spirits and take meticulous notes, and over the course of years you can develop your preferences and maybe your style of what you like or what doesn't exist but you would like for it to exist. And I've told the story before of when I was a bartender, happy hour was you got a graduated cylinder in front of you, and for $10 you got the back bar, and you could blend 50 milliliters of any dram you wanted, and you could blend bourbon, Scotch, you could just blend all single malts, you could blend Japanese whiskey with Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey, you could blend anything you want, as long as you wrote down the proportions and kind of scored it. So, okay, well, this works, well, this doesn't work. And it kind of became a popular thing to do. I'm surprised it's not done more often, frankly. If I ever have a bar again, I will definitely have graduated cylinders, because what it means is that all of the products behind the bartender, they're not, yes, they can be enjoyed as finished goods. It's fine, right? Go ahead, enjoy your name brand thing. But there's another perspective. Those are all ingredients. And you sitting at the bar are a creator, not a passive enjoyer of booze, which is fine as well. But you have the opportunity to make something that you've never had before, and to view these finished products behind you as ingredients, as inputs. And you can make whatever determination you want of what should go together, and it should happen without any regard to geopolitical boundaries or designations, just what goes well together. So for example, you could start with a bourbon, and give it a really nice peated Scotch viscous low note, and you could throw a nice Irish, a very aromatic Irish whiskey as the top note, and bourbon is the majority of it, and that's going to give you a dram that you're not going to find in any bottle. You'll only find it in the glass in front of you. And so as we were thinking about Eric's music and this concept of making a whiskey sort of in the form of a mash bill with whiskeys from all over, I kept on going back to this memory of being a bartender and how exciting it was to taste these whiskeys coming together, just one at a time, 50 milliliters at a time.
So there are a couple of things that I'm thinking about now, which is, first one is the blending of across the country lines. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. But just to address the graduated cylinders, it's been a while. We've talked about, I have a biochem background originally, and then heresy went to medieval studies. But I was at an event just last week at Travel Bar, and it was with Heaven Hill. Bernie Lubbers was there. It was all about Elijah Craig, and it was basically they took it was an event they had never done before. We all 30, I would guess, of us we each had three 200 milliliter bottles of an 8, a 9, and a 10-year-old Elijah Craig Barrel pick done in New York. All of us had different ones. So 30 different 8, 30 different 9, and 30 different 10s. They gave us that, an empty 200 ml bottle, graduated cylinder, and said, have at it. And so each of us came up with our own individual blends out of that. And they were all completely different because they all had different bases, different, some people hated their 9-year-old whiskeys. Mine was very heavy and varnishy, and it reminded me of Pre-Fire, Heaven Hill, and some of the older label Elijah Craig barrel proofs. So without being the kind of what I call oak water of the C18 and 23s. So I used that as a significant proportion of my blend because it wasn't so much about the flavor, but it added so much mouthfeel and body that I knew that the flavoring agents could be on top of that, but that was going to set a base. And now I have that, and it was a wonderful experience. It was just fun to have a graduated cylinder in front of you and be checking out where the meniscus line is and making sure it's right on.
Mm-hmm.
But so the other thing that it made me think of too was there was a time, and I know you addressed this a bit in your conversation with Mark from Whiskey Cast, excuse me, that there was a time when blending was the norm. I mean, to a large extent, it still is, but even for American companies. And it got me to thinking about a bottle that I have that I should share with you that I haven't talked about in a long time on the podcast, but it's a bottle from Lou Rosensteel's 65th birthday, I want to say. It was a one-off bottling made for him from Shenley when it was still a multinational giant. Blends in a 60-20-20 blend Canadian, Scotch, and bourbon whiskey, Kentucky bourbon whiskey. Nothing under 12 years old. And the story of how I found that bottle randomly could be a podcast unto itself, but it's a really fascinating mix because you just don't have that anymore. There are no other products, and this, what you have now with Outsider Spirits, with the legend, with Whiskey Gypsy is one of the few to do this now. But you don't really see multinational blends. They're just not out there. I mean, I'm struggling, even as I say it, to think of regular releases. There's I say that specifically because I know Suntory put out one last year that was World Whiskey AO, that did blend from around the world, but it's, in terms of regular releases, there just aren't any anymore. And even that bottle from Rosensteel was a one-off bottle. Came in a glass decanter that I had to check for lead and all of that. And I'll make sure to get you some of that to try. It was really incredible. But so the thought out of that, I guess, is what, from a whiskey historian perspective, what was it about cross border blending that it was so rare and still to this day remains nearly, I can't remember I'm blanking on the word right there, but like, it's just not there. It doesn't exist.
We are coming out of a dark era, or I should say a very, limited range of whiskeys. You brought up Shenley, and people these days aren't necessarily familiar with Shenley, which was massive. It's like the Diageo of its day. We've spoken about Shenley before because I'm obsessed with finding old Shenley advertisements. Old Shenley advertisements.
Right. Yes.
And I'm going to bring up a different one now, but previously we had a conversation about a Shenley advertisement from Vanity Fair's December 1934 issue, which was, to me, the first mention I ever saw of Rosen Rye being the most flavorful grain Mother Earth produces.
How could I have forgotten that? How could I have forgotten that from our episode? I want to apologize for that almost, because I just blanked completely that was part of the story there. But you're completely right. Sorry, continue.
I have another Shenley advertisement that I go on eBay, I buy them. I buy the original versions I have a collection of Shenley advertisements, because what Shenley was doing, if you're a whiskey maker and you want great ideas, go look up what Shenley was doing 100 years ago, prior to Prohibition, or even after Prohibition. They had a doctor who wrote a distiller's manual. His name's eluding me. His name, Dr. something. He wrote it in 1924. And if that's like this hidden holy grail. I haven't found that yet. I've been looking for it. But my intuition is that there's a lot of information. That was like a distiller's manual from Shenley in 1924. If anybody out there's got it, let me know. But there was another Shenley advertisement that I found and went on wild goose chase. I actually think I didn't buy it from eBay. I think I bought it from Abe Books, which is an online bookseller. And it was about a Shenley blend. I'll send you a copy of it. It says like 4 different states of where the whiskeys in the blend came from and what the attributes were of each state. It was like Kentucky for robust body, Pennsylvania for deep flavor, Maryland for, something else. And it occurred to me that folks used to have no problem listening to blending across state lines very explicitly because of the unique characteristics of each one of the inputs. So Shenley, again, I'm sure someone's written a history book on Shenley. I'm not a whiskey historian. I rely on whiskey historians for good ideas, which I try to execute. But Shenley knew a lot about the qualities of various varietals of grain relative to other like grains. That's the Rosen Rye story. But they also understood they had stocks of whiskey all over the country, and they understood that blending them together in different proportions would yield different products. Can't say enough about how great Shenley, how influential Shenley has been sort of in my whiskey making. And you can always, all the good ideas are in the past, right? I don't know if you've read this book, Brand Mysticism, by
Yes.
Stephen
Who's the
Grass
guy? Yes.
and Aaron Goldfarb.
Mhm.
One of the things that Stephen Grassi says in it is that all the good ideas are in the past. Like, just look to the past, you'll find all the good ideas. And I believe that deeply. But in terms of international blends, there are business reasons why it's been difficult to do. We work in an industry that's so highly regulated, and the consumers, are taught that certain political geographies make superior products to other political geographies, even if, for instance, uh, there's Kentucky, Tennessee, and southern Indiana, all in the Ohio River Valley, are pretty much the same soil type and weather conditions. The only difference between these things is humans came and drew some arbitrary lines. Now you have states, right? Them's fighting words in some circles, but I believe that it has to do with soil conditions and growth zone, USDA growth zones and climate. Then you have places like Michigan that have three vastly different soil types and three different. There's more. And I'm just using Michigan as an example. There's other states, certainly California and others, but we have more diverse weather conditions and soil types in Michigan than all of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana put together, which is why we have in Michigan such diverse agriculture. We can grow all this different stuff because there's all these little microclimates. But it just makes you think that these lines that humans have put on a map has nothing to do with the quality of agriculture, and whiskey's an agricultural product. Sometimes it has to do with the distilling philosophies, can sort of be based on these political geographies. It is my hope, and you personally have been very much at the forefront of highlighting spirits from regions that Americans might not be familiar with, but should be. And again, just like at the bar, these spirits can be enjoyed as a finished product in and of themselves, representing a place, and they should be understood and valued and respected as such. But they're also inputs into something that maybe has never been made before. And so as we're seeing these incredible new whiskeys, first of all, coming up in places, I'll give you, Israel as an example, because Milk and Honey just did so well at, these huge international competitions.
They swept a lot of that. Yeah.
It's a young distillery. There's all these young distilleries that have figured out, okay, I'm here. These are my maturation conditions. This is the growth zone that I'm in. This is what I can make really well. And we're starting to see places like Israel and India and other places have spirits that are appealing to an American palate. It's not to say that they weren't good before. They could have been totally fine, but they're now more accessible than ever. Someone was going to come in and say, our whiskey making philosophy is we're going to find the best spirits from wherever the hell they are, and we're going to blend them together. This was an inevitability. Again, to your point, we hadn't really seen a whole lot of it. Someone was going to come along and do it, and we figured we have, Raj from India, we have Eric from North Carolina, which has an amazing whiskey making tradition. So many of the folks came to Kentucky and Tennessee from North Carolina because Prohibition started very early there. The temperance movement was very strong there early on, 1850s and 60s. At one point, Statesville in North Carolina, I believe, was the largest producer of whiskey in the United States. Is what I'm told, and until it was kind of they put the clamp down and they came out west to Kentucky and Tennessee, and then of course I'm coming from Michigan, where we have a proud tradition of supporting Canadian whiskey makers by smuggling their goods across America's longest international border. The border between Michigan and Canada has always been very porous. And at times when it was difficult to get American-made whiskey, we Michiganders came to the service of whiskey drinkers and figured out how to get good Canadian whiskey into the United States. So we've always been blending, in my area, we've always been blending Canadian whiskey with, American styles. Someone was going to come along and make the blending of whiskeys without any notion that political geography is important. It's just about the whiskey. Someone was going to come out and do this, and we figured, why the hell not us?
Honestly, as much as people want to search for inspiration, and I'm certainly someone who likes to ask the why questions of how people think. Sometimes it does come down to just I've got an idea. Why the hell not? Why the hell not us? Like you just said, no one else is doing it. No one else that we know of is doing it.
We
Let's
know it's good. I mean, I knew it was
let's
good from
try
my
it.
bartending days. You mentioned a really cool blending experience that you did. I'll and it's awesome participating in the blending of whiskeys. One thing I will say about American whiskey, bourbon in particular, is yes, there's a good amount of diversity in American whiskeys, but American whiskey is a very particular style. It's very heavy on oak, and it's highly influenced by the cask. Usually the primary grain is yellow dent number 2, which nobody cultivates because it tastes good. That's
Oh
just
yeah,
not the reason why you do it. It's a good source of starch, which converts into ethanol, right? And then you can use that ethanol to pull out barrel flavors. So nothing against that. It's fine. But when we would make blends at the bar of various bourbons, oftentimes it was difficult to differentiate between one and the next because the style of American whiskey is just certainly relative to a place like Scotland, where you have massive amounts of diversity in the characteristics available in those whiskeys. That just doesn't exist in the United States in any kind of meaningful way. So if you do choose to blend whiskeys, it makes a lot of sense to look outside of the United States, where there's a much stronger diversity of whiskey character for the blends to service those blends. So yeah, blending American whiskey is awesome. You can do a lot of cool things. You've got bourbon and corn whiskey and rye whiskey and wheat whiskey. For the most part, that's what you've got. For the most part, it's been aged in new American casks. So what can you do? You can barrel finish it. You can stick it in a secondary barrel, which is great. Of course, many of the most incredible finishing barrels come from overseas and may have had really interesting whiskeys in them beforehand. So why not look overseas for those whiskeys? I work with a bunch of barrel brokers. We have outsiders, and for other things, one of the most, I don't know, have you ever done a podcast with a whiskey broker, with someone who goes all over the world looking for secondary casks to sell them to American whiskey makers?
Wolfburn Distillery captures the spirit of Scotland's far north. As the northernmost distillery on the Scottish mainland, Wolfburn ties together long fermentation, slow distillation, and seaside maturation for unique and superb character. Originally founded in 1821, this exceptional distillery was restored in 2012 to its original greatness, resurrecting a 200-year-old distillery on the largest blanket peat bog in all of Europe. Whether you're drinking Northland, Wolfburn's first expression, aged in American oak quarter casks, Aurora, a beautiful sherried whiskey laid down in a combination of bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks, Morvern, their lightly peated variety, or Langskip, their cask strength release, there's a Wolfburn for everyone. Arriving to the States later this year is their first permanent age-stated release, the 10-year-old. You can also find small batch releases and limited edition bottlings at specialty retailers across the U.S. Reach out to our friends at Impex Beverages for more information on where to find your favorite expression. Wolfburn Distillery. Fortune favors the brave. I don't think I was supposed to do one with I hope she won't mind me calling her out because I'm still trying to get her on as a guest, Jessica Atkins.
Incredible.
Yeah, but that's exactly why I wanted to have her on, was to talk about that. So future episode,
These people
Jessica,
are
get
heroes.
back in touch with you.
Like, like you could do a couple of these interviews because these folks are as responsible for the level of diversity that we see in American whiskey as anyone, because the whiskeys are by and large very similar. By and large, very similar, and they're being differentiated because of these casks, right? These barrel brokers, who, especially the ones who go out and visit the places and select the barrels, and I'm happy to give you some phone numbers. They're texting me from these totally, here we are in some area in Spain or Croatia or Hungary that you've never heard of. And they say, hey, I found this incredible barrel. My response is always, I'll buy the barrel, but bring me some of the liquid that was inside of it too. I want that too. I need to know what was in the barrel that makes it so fantastic. These barrel brokers are trying such interesting stuff that never makes it to the United States. When you see something aged in, peach brandy barrels from Greece or something, those barrels have so much character in them, but the brandy that was inside of them, that has incredible character too, right? So anyhow, it would be an interesting podcast to talk to some of those folks, but secondary barrels, that's how we derive a lot of the flavors that we have in American whiskey, because the whiskey itself is sort of limited in what it can express. But going international in terms of whiskey selection solves for that problem.
I think, well, first, let's just with the secondary barrels, I agree with you. It's important to taste what was in them, and a bunch of the kind of, let's call them, for better or worse, flash in the pan crazes of certain barrel types. Like you mentioned Hungary, there was the Tokai finishing. That right now Amburana is the hottest barrel out there. Those trends, or flashes, however long they last, those start with somebody trying a product somewhere new and saying, wow, this barrel is really weird and interesting. Let's add that in. I mean, in Japan, that's the Mizunara oak is a native species there, but yeah, I don't know who the first one to bring it over to U.S. whiskey was. Probably Bainbridge or someone like that. But the point being that it takes someone to go over, try it, and say this would pair well. Now, something else that I've talked about on the podcast, and this is specific to American whiskey, and a complaint that I often have about it, is that, I mean, bourbon in particular, or at least corn-based distillate, just does not hold up well to secondary finishing for me. Rye holds up a little bit better, particularly the higher the rye content, and also throwing in certain varieties. Single malts can usually stand up pretty well, but especially with bourbons, there are so few for me that are taking bourbons from any source and finishing them and doing it in a way where the finish and the bourbon or the whiskey are in balance. You can still tell what's underneath. You can appreciate the finishing cask. I usually look to Doc Swinson's as my favorite. We were chatting before. Tonight, as we're recording, I tasted Blood Oath Pack 9. It's three Kentucky bourbons, excuse me, with the youngest one finished in Oloroso sherry casks. That was really well done. I haven't loved all the Blood Oath packs, but the last two have been real bangers. And there's a hesitation when I look at American whiskey being aged in secondary casks, because not all of it, I'd say the majority of it just doesn't, it's either done for a trend or for the hell of it, rather than it being for a purpose and for, really trying it out to get a balance. Like whoever thought of the friggin', everyone who's listening knows which brand I'm talking around, but with the coconut raspberry finish and all this stuff. So anyway, where was I going with that? The point being, that's why I like the idea so much of this international, because there is a beauty of American spirits, of bourbon, of rye, of bourbon in particular being a uniquely American spirit. And the beauty of it doesn't have to get lost by including something Canadian in in the case of Whiskey Gypsy, which we will talk about before we're up, I promise. Uh, and if we were to add in a Scotch or an Irish whiskey, there's nothing wrong with that. It could lend itself very well, but someone's got to take the leap to do it. And they just haven't done it. But in this case, and I'm turning my head actually to look at the packaging of this. And I put up some pictures on Instagram of when I got this, of the Journey Batch 1 Whiskey Gypsy. And I think of it this way. I mean, this was a purposely prepared press sample. And it was done beautifully. It comes in what looks and functions as a book. It's got a cutout. It has the first few pages, which are actually, you can write in them as a travel journal. And then you turn a few more pages and suddenly there's a cutout with the bottle inside. And especially, I think, for a press bottle, you don't have to do that. Personally, I'm just as happy getting 2-ounce sample bottle of something with the handwritten label on it, and you hope nothing leaked in transit, kind of thing. But there is a certain beauty to having this, because even as a press sample, I can now put this on my shelf. I can put the book on my shelf, and it'll look beautiful. And as more volumes of this come out, then you have a collection. So, well, actually, I'll hold off on the packaging question for a second because I want to talk about that. But with the first product, so we've talked about it just to make it perfectly clear to people what the blends are, or what the blend is, I should say. It is a 70% Indiana bourbon made from 99% corn and 1% malted barley, distilled in Indiana, aged 7 to 8 years. The second component, 21% Canadian rye, made from 91% rye, 9% malted barley, distilled in Alberta, aged 20 years. And the last 9% is 100% malted barley from Indiana, aged 4 years. Now, NDAs and stuff aside, may I assume from nonverbal contact that Indiana means what we think it means in Indiana?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. We're about transparency, which is why we write it very much on the back of the label.
I mean, you never know. There's an NDA somewhere. I don't want anyone crossing that. That's not my business. But from that particular distillery, particularly the single malt, I'm trying to remember who I had of the other day that I had single malt from that distillery. And I was like, that I've never tried before. Tried a lot of their products over the years from a lot of different producers, but never the single malt. And I remember the other product was very, very different. And this one, it added a nice round body to it that single malt can do, even at a younger age, which 4 years, relatively younger age by itself, and then compared to its sister components, also younger age. So overall, you're blending. Well, what was the order in which you found the right components?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to go back to the book that you got in the press kit just real quick.
Yeah.
Because it is a real book. And what struck me the most about it, because maybe this is just kind of my way of interacting with the world, is it smells like a book. Mm-hmm. It does. It smells like when you order a new book that just came out, and it's got not the old musty smell. I love the old musty smell from a used book, but this has a great new book smell. And then the cutout is very Shawshank Redemption-y. Yes. If you're a fan of that movie, and when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that's very Shawshanky. I love it. The components were selected intentionally because what we wanted to do in this first expression was highlight grain. And by choosing a 99% corn bourbon at 7 and 8 years old, we could have gone with something that was 13 years old, tried those. but they tasted more like wood. This isn't about age. Things don't just get better over time. They change over time. And what we were trying to do in this is really highlight the grain. So that is why we selected the 99% corn bourbon at that age. At an older age, there is less grain that comes through and more wood. But at that age, there is a good balance between the two that would serve as the foundation of the blend. We tried a lot of different ryes from all over the world for this first blend. And there is something about a rye that's 2 decades old that was aged in a cool climate, which is different than a rye that was aged in a warm climate or a new American oak. There are nuances of flavor that develop in cool climates that don't develop in warm climates, which has to do with there's chemical reactions that involve oxygen in whiskey, just chemical reactions that happen over time, decades. A cold liquid can hold more oxygen than a warm liquid. And if you have something that's matured for a long time in a cool climate, you get, I believe, more of these esterification reactions that involve oxygen than you get in a warm climate, where the liquid, just because of its temperature, can't hold as much dissolved oxygen inside of it. In that component in particular had such a beautiful viscous mouthfeel and aromas was like at different dilution points, different aromas were coming out, different volatiles were coming out of solution at different dilution points. It was just this incredible Canadian rye that we knew we wanted to have as the 21% component blend. We could have gone with a 36 and it would have been very, very interesting as well. And then the reason why we chose a 4-year-old malted barley wasn't because we could have used a 30-year-old Scotch, right, as the 9% component. That would have been totally fine conceptually. Or we could have used an older American single malt. But the older American single malts past that age, the barrel started to take over too much. Mm-hmm. And it lost that barley character that we were looking for. You lose that over time. So we wanted something for the 9% malted barley component. We really needed a spirit that, for this product, wasn't aged 10 years, wasn't aged 20 or 30 years. Future products, I can't speak for. I think you can see a lot of really cool stuff. For Legacy 001, sort of an introduction to a concept, we wanted to make sure that the corn component was very much about the corn and not just about new American oak and a spirit that had been sitting in wood for a very long time, giving off nothing but wood character. The rye needed to be a very special rye. With the characteristics that were different than other ryes. We found that in the 20-year-old. And then again, very intentionally chose a 4.5-year-old American single malt because of its character, not in spite of its age. Its age is totally immaterial here. We could have wowed everyone with major age statements, but that's not the point. The point is reconstitute a bourbon mash bill using grain forward spirits in a way that people haven't probably had before. I've never had before. And big props to Raj and Eric, who could have taken the easy route and thrown a famous name on a label and used the same juice that everyone, the same spirit that everyone else uses with a major age statement, called it a day, been done. They chose to do something very unconventional. They chose to do something that's not particularly market tested as far as these kinds of blends of who blends a 4-year-old single malt and a 20-year-old rye and a 99% corn bourbon. I mean, it's not an intuitive thing to do. But we went through a lot of prototypes of different mash bills, different spirit inputs, and this is the one that we just kind of kept on coming back to. So this one's just really, it's different. and hopefully it pushes the conversation about what blending can be forward.
And you mentioned that particularly the corn whiskey, I'd imagine the others as well, at a certain dilution point, different aromas, different compounds start coming out. It's worth noting that this is not, if it is diluted, it seems minimal. It comes out at 115 proof, which I'll admit it was a little difficult to find. Um, it was a little difficult to find what the proof was, but I found it eventually, because I was like, this is definitely not 90. So,
Yeah.
it's higher than that, but I wanted to know what it was. But it's not. It's maybe diluted a little bit, but not a lot. 115 is still a very solid proof, even for a proof hound like I am. So you mentioned though that there are two components to that I want to dig into a little bit, and I know we're running a little short,
Yeah.
so but the first one being that it's, as a concept, relatively untested, and then subsequently to that, as a product, it's very practically untested. Uh, how did you and the team go about kind of assessing what the market would look like for a product like this?
Yeah. So in terms of untested, there are not a lot of blends of this sort out there. We have several people who have helped us evaluate prototypes, various prototypes, and feedback from a very wide and diverse, group of folks that have had a lot of whiskey and are familiar with the whiskey making process and blending. Their feedback was sort of instrumental in coming up with this blend, very much a team effort. Remind me what the question was real quick.
Oh, assessing the market.
Yeah, assessing the market. We know that that blended whiskeys are on the ascendance, that consumers are more interested in blended whiskeys than ever before, that blended whiskeys is not a dirty word any longer. That unfortunately we have antiquated regulations that don't differentiate between whiskeys that are blended using the most premium inputs available anywhere versus someone who's using 2-year-old bourbon and GNS, right? That they all fit into the same category, unfortunately. So this concept wouldn't have flown 5 years ago, but there has been so many interesting blends that have captivated people and won awards and been successful in the market that the team at Outsiders decided, okay, it's the right idea to take this category, which is ill-defined, a bad, and let's push it even further. Let's see how far we can take it. So again, I don't think that anyone it's a little bit market tested in that you can look over the past couple of years of top 10 lists, and generally you'll find something that is not a single source distillery. You'll find that a blend. Oftentimes it's a brand that's sourcing from multiple distilleries, which is great. Those are starting to show up in the market. So again, someone was going to kind of continue this route, and we figured, why not us?
And we should give a couple of shout outs to that, because we're no episode is ever without its contexts and without its shout outs. So a couple of them being that, just speaking to American whiskey, we've spoken to a few. Lost Lantern has their vatted malt. Borrowed Page, whose follow-up interview came out earlier today as a recording, but also for volume 1, we had an episode with them, and they're blending all American whiskeys. Now, that in itself is as you said, it's a huge step forward from where we were. And I agree with you that 5 years ago, the concept, even their concepts, may not have flown, let alone your concept, Outsider Spirits concept. And with more and more trying these multi-distillery, multi-state blends, especially, it's pushing the blended whiskey category up from its nadir of that two-year old bourbon and a lot of GNS, and um, it's a good thing. It's a really good thing, and as we said, that's blended whiskey in particular is something that I'm very passionate about from a historical perspective and from just an enjoyment perspective, to see that this is something truly different, and
Yeah,
you could
in
it's
blending whiskeys,
limitless.
it's limitless. And when you don't care about having bourbon in big letters on the label, it's incredibly freeing. If
Mhm.
the point is just find the best whiskeys that are out there that blend together, that will yield a product that's greater than the sum of its parts, you don't even have to worry about categories of whiskey anymore. You can blend a Canadian with an American single malt. And you can develop entirely new characteristics, or characteristics that folks haven't had since Shenley was doing this stuff 75 years ago. That for me is incredibly, it's incredibly freeing, right? You don't have the parameters that existed before. It doesn't have to be a bourbon. You can blend a bourbon with a single malt. You can blend it. Folks have been blending American rye with Canadian rye, for instance, which is sort of crossing the category, but
Right.
they're not dipping the toe over into bourbon or single malt. These are all components. These are all ingredients at this point. You can certainly choose to release a bourbon, and the market will probably thank you for it, right? Because if it says bourbon on it, could very well
It'll
do
sell.
okay.
Yeah.
But the opportunity to innovate in the whiskey space has to do with, I believe, blending different categories of whiskey together.
And I think the brands and companies just mentioned would back you on that's the next logical step. As we're getting towards the end of the interview, I wanted to save a question towards the end that I didn't really think of right away, but did come up as I was kind of formulating the questions, and it's the question of branding and packaging. So I want to ask, who you worked with for the packaging for sure, because again, brilliant. And but the first part of it that I have to ask is, was there any concern from a branding perspective of using the term gypsy in the label? Because it's
Yeah.
not, it can be used quite pejoratively in, I mean, not necessarily areas of the US. That's more of a European phenomenon, I would say, but it can be used pejoratively. And
And it has been
words
used
coming off,
pejoratively.
right. And words coming off of it, like gypped, comes from gypsy. It's GYPPED. Um, things like that. So was there any concern in the branding of using a potentially problematic term?
Yes, is the short answer. It was, well, what I say is it was a conversation that we had.
Mhm.
Um, and at the end of the day, the term as we use it is the furthest thing from pejorative. It comes from a tradition of uh, in music, for example, Muddy Waters uses, Gypsy woman told my mother before I was born, you got a boy child coming, going to be a Rolling Stone. Um, in one of the songs that I've played for my children since they were inside of my wife's womb was a song called Wiggle Wiggle by Bob Dylan, where wiggle, wiggle, wiggle like a gypsy queen. Van Morrison sings about the caravan. There is a pejorative story in that word, but it is more than that. It is not just that. That word also has a beautiful and rich history, not just in music, but also in all kinds of forms of art, um, to mean freedom, to mean crossing boundaries. Yes, it has a complex history, not denying that in any way, but it means something else as well. And to focus entirely on the negative connotation without paying any sort of honor to the incredible positive connotations to it as well, I think is to give the folks that would use it pejoratively the upper hand, and they don't deserve that.
Fair. It was, you know me. I don't do gotcha questions on here,
Yeah,
and
it's a great
but it,
question.
yeah, but it was something that kind of just clicked in as, yeah, you never know. My first trip to Italy, literally the first thing we were warned about was keep your things in your front pockets in Florence because there are people in carts and people who are going to steal stuff from you. And the guide said in Italian, but the translation was literally these gypsies are stealing everything. And that has stuck with me as something. And I mean, we're both from Jewish backgrounds as well. So we have a little bit of the gypsy slash klezmer and the itinerant kind of lifestyle that goes with that as well in our histories. So you're right. It's an incredibly complex term, one that does not have to be pejorative, can be, but
Okay.
I think with explaining a little more and addressing that question, it can take some of that stigma off of it. And I don't think that's I think that's a bit much to ask from a whiskey to take centuries of stigma off of a culture, but um, just the simple knowledge of knowing what the term is, what the term means, and where it comes from can be very powerful towards dispelling that. So,
It's a great
but
question, and I'm glad that you asked it.
yeah.
Yeah, folks that would uh, uh, be derogatory towards Romany or Gypsy culture um, don't deserve to have the upper hand here. We're celebrating a form of what is called the Gypsy spirit, which has existed in music and literature for quite a while.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, even my own perspective, I worked in France, in wineries in France, um, with quite a few itinerant farmers and workers from Morocco and Romany who did refer to themselves very proudly as Gypsy. So from my own history, yes, I've heard obviously we've all heard the derogatory terms, um, but it's not just that. And I think when you let the racists, you know, own a word like that, which has otherwise very positive connotations. Again, it's complex, but that's not ground that we're willing to cede to those people, to the racists.
Yeah, that's something to be proud of. And yeah, so had to ask that, but
Yeah.
we're going to close on a lighter question than that because that would be a terrible, an important but a terrible question to end on. Um, and that is, so before I forget, who did you work with on the packaging?
We actually worked with a number of folks. The packaging, and I've got the bottle here. I don't know if you were mentioning the book. The bottle itself is an absolutely beautiful decanter that looks like hand hammered copper. Again, not a design we'd seen before. And as a wine guy, it's got about the deepest punt on the bottom of the bottle that we've seen. Um, uh, we worked with a designer named David Cole, among other folks. David Cole is an incredible designer up in the Northwest. Um, and I can tell you is there's more than a few Easter eggs to be found in the packaging. If you buy the bottle, you'll find that there's all kinds of cool things to discover. Um, and yeah, we're incredibly proud of it. There was a lot of thought and consideration that went into it. It's a cool copper thing, kind of coin up here. Really nice metal around the band, solid wood cork, with actual cork. I
Mhm.
mean, it's team spared really no expense in creating a package that's very much unlike other packages. What I can say about the hand hammered copper look, if you put a like an LED or a light below it, it illuminates and it diffracts light in an absolutely gorgeous way. And yeah, just never seen a hand hammered design like this on a bottle before.
No, and it is quite attractive. I have to say, I've gotten more and more of an appreciation for bottle design and secondary packaging design.
Mm-hmm.
And um, one more name to throw out there as well, because we were talking about how it smells like a new book. Um, when I spoke with both Compass Box and Stranger, they were talking about Velicor, the release from Compass Box that smelled like old. Well, didn't smell like it, but it was inspired by the smell of old books, which is what Velicor means. So there's an element of that. And again, the medievalist in me, anytime you smell a book, new, old, hopefully not musty, but anything else brings you joy. So
Yes.
And in books we find the inspiration, we find the stories and the histories that, as you said, we look to the past for the inspirations. And a lot of that is going to be found in these books that we're reading. And I think we have a conversation to have between the two of us about an idea that I had forgotten about and now want to pursue as potentially my next big side project. And we'll take that offline and leave that as a teaser for now. But in the meantime, you can find this first release, the Whiskey Gypsy Legacy Volume 001, The Journey, on Reserve Bar. Right now, it's shipping to 38 states. You can, and there will be a link for that in the show notes directly. You probably know what Reserve Bar is, but if you don't worry, we got you covered. There'll be a link for it. We'll also link to any social media. There will be, I've already posted or did I post? If I haven't posted my review, I will post my review. I did quite enjoy it and but I was waiting probably to talk with Ari before posting it. So I got more information. And as always with that, there will be, any relevant links will be in there. And I encourage you to try it, buy it, and enjoy it.
Also available in fine retailers throughout the state of Tennessee.
All right, so I noticed that. Can we take 1 minute to just address that?
Sure.
Is that simply because Eric's from Tennessee and wanted to represent there, or was there a different reason?
Yeah, home state of Tennessee.
Okay.
We wanted to represent. Wanted to make sure that folks wanted to support our home state.
I noticed that was the one state that it was like in stores in Tennessee. I was like, okay, that's Occam's razor. Simplest answer is usually the right one. Anyway, Ari, thank you so much for coming back on to chat about this. As you have future volumes, you're always welcome back on to chat about them, about the new blends that may be coming in the future, that are coming in the future. And with that, we'll say goodnight. You hold on with me for a minute. That's been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast, episode total number 100 in the books. Thank you, everybody, for supporting. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you for the next 100. Hey, folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.